This story was sent to me earlier this week. I'll read it exactly the way it was written. The weather turned faster than I expected. One minute the trail was clear, and the next, the wind was pushing against my chest hard enough to make every step feel wrong. My phone stopped updating my location. The signal bars vanished, and the map froze on a stretch of green that suddenly meant nothing. Branches snapped somewhere above me, sharp and loud, like they were breaking on purpose. The light faded quicker than it should have, and the forest seemed to lean inward as the shadows thickened. I remember thinking that climbing higher would be a mistake. The ridge ahead looked darker, steeper, and too exposed to risk in that wind. That's when I noticed a weathered sign half buried near an old service road. The letters were worn down, but it clearly pointed downhill. I followed it, telling myself anything was better than staying where I was. After a few minutes, something pale reflected my flashlight beam through the trees. It took a moment to register as a building. A lodge, tucked so deep into the slope it felt like it didn't want to be seen. The windows were dark, and the place looked abandoned. Still, it was standing, and I wasn't sure I would be if I kept moving. I circled it once, listening. No voices, no movement, just wind sliding along the walls. The back door opened when I tried it. That was the first moment I realized how quiet my hands were shaking. The air inside didn't smell like rot or dust the way I expected. It was neutral, almost clean, like a room that had been aired out recently, not abandoned. My boots barely made a sound when I stepped in. There was no grit, no crunch, nothing that suggested no one had been here for years. I swept my light across the room, slow and careful. The furniture was old, but everything was positioned neatly, like it had been put back after use. Beside the fireplace, firewood was stacked evenly, not piled counted. The sink drew my attention next. Faint watermarks clung to the metal, the kind that don't last long unless someone uses it. I realized I'd stopped moving. I was just standing there, listening, without knowing what I was listening for. The lodge wasn't silent. It felt restrained, like sound was being kept inside the walls, as if the space itself was aware of me. I locked the door behind me without deciding to. The click echoed too sharply, like I'd done something irreversible. I told myself it was only a shelter, but the thought didn't settle the way it should have. I found the bottle on a shelf near the back wall. It was small, sealed tight, filled with a dark red liquid that caught the light too easily. There was no label, no warning, no explanation, just glass and that color. Next to it sat a wooden board, carved with sharp, precise lines. The shapes weren't decorative. They felt deliberate. Wax had dripped down its edges and hardened into uneven ridges. The wood beneath was blackened, like something had burned there more than once. I tried to convince myself it was art, or maybe some kind of cultural thing I didn't understand. That thought didn't hold when I noticed the metal tools. They were laid out carefully, not tossed aside. Some were thin and hooked. Others were blunt, heavy, and stained in places I didn't want to look at too closely. I stepped back and felt something tacky under my boot. When I lifted my foot, The floor gleamed darkly where I'd been standing. I moved toward what looked like a bedroom, telling myself I just needed a place to sit. The door opened without a sound, like it had been oiled recently. The bed was made, not neatly, not tight, just intentionally arranged. A folded blanket rested at the foot, creased down the middle. It looked like it had been handled that same day. Inside the closet, a heavy jacket hung alone. It smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic. The curtains were drawn just enough to leave a thin slit of outside light. I could see the trees through it, but the glass reflected me more clearly than the forest beyond. I realized then how carefully everything was centered. The bed, the window, even the chair in the corner. I turned my flashlight off for a second to save the battery. The darkness felt immediate, thick, pressing. That's when I heard it. A low engine sound, distant and very real. It cut off suddenly, like someone had just arrived. I was halfway back to the main room when gravel crunched outside. Not wind weight. Slow, deliberate. Then came the sound of a car door closing. Soft, controlled, close enough that my stomach dropped before my mind caught up. I froze where I stood, listening. The lodge felt smaller all of a sudden, like the walls had shifted inward. Another step outside. Then another, heavier on one side, dragging slightly. I didn't think. I just moved, cutting the flashlight and backing into the darkest space I could find. My shoulder brushed the wall between the kitchen and the living area. I pressed myself flat, barely breathing. No door creaked. No announcement, no cough, no voice. Just footsteps inside now. Slow, uneven, and unhurried, like whoever it was knew exactly how much time they had. The footsteps moved through the lodge like they had every right to be there. One step, a pause, then another. Always the same uneven rhythm. One leg dragged slightly. Not badly injured, just wrong enough to be unmistakable. No lights came on. Not even a hesitation, like darkness wasn't an obstacle he needed to consider. I watched the dark itself shift as he moved through it. Nothing was bumped, nothing scraped. He knew exactly where everything was. He stopped near the center of the room. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like a question being asked without words. I tried to control my breathing, but my chest kept tightening anyway. Every inhale felt amplified, trapped inside my skull. When the footsteps started again, they were closer than they should have been. The space I thought I'd put between us had already collapsed. I listened harder, trying to map him by sound. It didn't work. Every time I thought I knew where he was, the next step came from somewhere else. That's when I understood he wasn't moving blindly through the lodge. He was moving with intention. I shifted my weight, trying to move while he was still on the far side of the room. The instant my fingers brushed the doorknob, metal clicked softly beneath my touch. The sound felt enormous, too precise, too final. The footsteps stopped at once. Not slowed, stopped, like they'd been waiting for that exact mistake. Nothing moved after that. The silence pressed in until my ears rang with it. Then the steps began again, slower than before. Each one landed carefully, placed rather than taken. I could feel the distance between us shrinking without him rushing. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with breathing. It was the same feeling you get when someone is standing just out of view, close enough to reach you. I didn't open the door. I couldn't make myself finish the motion. I pressed flat against the wall, holding still, afraid even swallowing would give me away. My throat felt dry, stretched thin, like it might betray me on its own. Somewhere nearby, a drawer slid open. Metal brushed against metal, slow, controlled, like something was being selected. I took the chance when the sound came from the kitchen. I moved low and slow, keeping my feet where the floor looked clean. Then my heel touched something wet. Not water, thicker, tacky, clinging. I knew what it was before I looked. That same dark red sheen I'd seen earlier, spread thin across the boards. My heart started racing for a new reason. I hadn't just stepped in it. I'd marked myself. I lifted my foot and saw it glisten in the faint light. Every step after that would say exactly where I'd been. I slipped my boots off and held them against my chest. The floor felt colder immediately, like it noticed. Barefoot now, I tried to move again. Slower. Lighter. Somewhere behind me, the footsteps changed direction. And I knew he had seen what I left behind. The footsteps stopped near the center of the room again. I pictured him standing there, looking down at the floor instead of around. Something shifted, slowly, carefully. The sound reminded me of a man lowering himself to his knees. I could almost hear fabric brush against wood, the kind of quiet movement you only notice when you're already terrified. He didn't follow the marks right away. That hesitation was worse than pursuit. I braced myself for the steps to come straight toward me. They never did. Instead, the sound drifted away, tracing a wide, patient arc through the lodge. Not chasing, circling. It felt wrong, like I'd misunderstood the nature of what was happening. This wasn't how something hunted. Every few seconds, the dragging step paused. I couldn't tell if he was listening, thinking, or waiting for something to finish. With each slow loop, the space around me felt smaller. I kept retreating, not because I chose to, but because there was nowhere else to be. That's when it hit me. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was being guided. I waited until the footsteps faded toward the far end of the lodge, then moved again. Bare skin against the wood made every step feel exposed, like the floor could feel me back. I slipped into the narrow hallway, counting each step, keeping my weight centered. My heartbeat felt loud enough to leak out of my chest. Then I heard it ahead of me. Not behind, in front. I froze, trying to understand how he could be there already, without making a sound. The dragging step came softly from the end of the hall, steady and unhurried. There was no rush in it. No correction. No sign he'd had to change course. Every direction I considered felt wrong the moment I thought of it. The kitchen, the bedroom, even the front door, each one felt occupied before I reached it. I backed away without turning around. My shoulder brushed the wall, and a faint vibration ran through it, like the lodge was hollow. That was when I noticed the repetition. The same corners, the same distances. I hadn't been escaping. Each turn, each retreat, had been feeding me back toward the same space. The marks on the floor, subtle, half seen, started to align in my head. I wasn't lost. I was being placed. I caught sight of him when I leaned just far enough to look. Only for a second, but it was enough. He was taller than I expected. Shoulders sloped slightly forward. One leg dragged behind him. Not injured exactly, just wrong. His clothes looked like work clothes, clean but worn thin. Too clean for a place like this. In his hand was something metal, narrow and dull in the low light. He wasn't gripping it tightly, just holding it, like a habit. I was sure our eyes met. The feeling hit me instantly, sharp and electric. But he didn't react. Didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't even tense. He passed by like I wasn't there at all, like I was part of the furniture. That was worse than being seen. It felt deliberate. As he moved on, my light briefly caught thin lines on the floor. Straight, angled, intersecting, leading exactly where I'd been forced to walk. I lowered my light and traced the lines with my eyes instead of the beam. They weren't scratches or damage someone had placed them there. The angles repeated with uncomfortable precision. Straight segments, sharp turns, crossing at points that felt chosen. I knew those shapes. The recognition came before the memory. The wooden board on the shelf forced its way back into my thoughts. The carved lines, the symmetry, the way it hadn't felt like decoration even then. My stomach tightened as I replayed my movements. Every turn I'd taken, every retreat I'd thought was mine. They lined up, not perfectly, but close enough to make my fingers go numb. I hadn't been hiding at random. I'd been moving along something already laid out, a pattern built out of fear and footsteps, something that only revealed itself once most of it was already drawn. From near the center of the lodge, the dragging step sounded again, closer to where all the lines seemed to meet. That was when the truth settled in, heavy and unavoidable. I wasn't being hunted. I was being used. I thought about the front door, about forcing myself through it no matter what. But the footsteps shifted there, slow and patient, cutting the thought off before it finished. The curtain near the window stirred, even though there was no wind inside. I couldn't tell if that meant the window was open or if something had passed too close. I moved again, because standing still felt worse. The floor was colder now, leaching heat from my feet. That's when it happened. A sharp, precise pain bloomed under my foot. I bit down so hard my jaw ached, stopping the sound before it could escape. My body jolted, balance gone, vision swimming. I didn't need to look to know what I'd stepped on. Metal has a very specific kind of pain. Blood spread instantly, warm and slick between my toes. I could feel it trying to drip, trying to mark the floor. The dragging step changed direction immediately. This time, there was no guessing where he was headed. I pressed myself into a narrow gap and lifted my foot, shaking, Every second I held it there felt like an hour. The pain didn't fade. It pulsed, bright and deliberate, like it wanted to be noticed. The footsteps came closer, slower than before. Each one felt placed, deliberate, like he didn't need to search anymore. I saw his shadow stretch across the floor before I saw him. One leg bent wrong, the shadow dragging just a moment longer than it should have. He lowered himself with a quiet grunt, knees touching the boards not far from my feet. Close enough that the air felt different. I could see his hand clearly now, pale, steady, completely unshaken. His fingers brushed along the floor and stopped. Metal clicked softly as he picked something up. My chest tightened when I recognized it. The tack I'd stepped on its tip, dark, slick. He turned it between his fingers, examining it like proof. There was no rush, no reaction, no satisfaction. For a moment, I was certain he knew exactly where I was, that he was waiting for me to break first. But he didn't look toward me. He straightened slowly and walked to the door. He pulled it open wide, letting cold air pour in. The night rushed inside like it had been invited. Then, without stepping outside, he turned and disappeared into another room. The door stayed open behind him, not as an escape, as if something had just been completed. The lodge went still in a way it hadn't before. Not empty, just paused. I waited for his steps to come back. They didn't. My foot throbbed in time with my heartbeat, warm and slick in my hand. I pressed harder, afraid even the sound of blood would give me away. I heard him move. The sound of the door came next. Wood shifting. A hinge giving way. He opened it fully. The open door breathed cold air into the room. It smelled like wet leaves and freedom. I waited for his steps to go outside. They never did. Instead, I heard him turn away from the door, his uneven steps fading back into the lodge, swallowed by its deeper rooms. I kept telling myself it was a trick, that he was standing just out of sight, waiting for me to run. Seconds dragged. Then minutes. Nothing moved. No shift of weight, no scrape of fabric. I couldn't stay where I was. Pain or not, I needed distance. I searched for my boots in the dark and realized I'd dropped them somewhere behind me. Going back for them felt worse than leaving them. I took one breath, then another, and decided that if I was going to die tonight, it wouldn't be on that floor. I stepped forward on bare feet, every nerve screaming in protest. The floor felt alive beneath me, slick in places, bitterly cold everywhere else. I kept my eyes locked on the open doorway. It was the only part of the room that didn't feel like it was closing in. Halfway there, my foot slid through the dark stain again. The surface clung to my skin, almost resisting, like it didn't want to let me pass. I stumbled, caught myself against the wall, and pushed off hard. Pain exploded up my leg, sharp and blinding, but I didn't slow down. Cold air hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. The warmth of the lodge vanished instantly, swallowed by the night. Behind me, wood shifted. A small sound, controlled, unmistakable. I didn't turn around. I couldn't risk seeing him there. I ran downhill, branches clawing at my clothes, stones cutting into my feet. The ground dropped away unevenly, forcing my body to react without thinking. Every step felt wrong, misjudged, barely controlled. But stopping felt impossible. Somewhere behind me, something scraped once. Then there was nothing but my own breath tearing out of my chest, loud and panicked in the dark. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't slow down. The forest swallowed sound strangely, like it was deciding what to keep and what to erase. My own footsteps felt too loud, then suddenly too far away. I clicked my flashlight on for a second, then off again. The beam showed nothing familiar, just trunks, rocks, and the slope dropping away. I kept listening for him, for the drag of that leg, for proof that it wasn't here anymore. Nothing followed. That absence felt intentional, heavier than pursuit. My lungs burned, each breath scraping raw. Cold air cut straight through me, sharp and clean. I slipped once, hard, catching myself on my hands. When I pushed back up, my palms were smeared red. That was when it hit me. He wasn't chasing because he didn't need to. Whatever he wanted, he already had something of mine. I forced myself toward what I thought was the service road. The slope eased just enough to tell me I was getting closer to something human-made. The rain thinned into a cold mist, clinging to my skin, mixing with blood and dirt. Each step sent a dull pulse up my leg, but the ground felt firmer here, more predictable. Through the trees, a brief sweep of white light cut across the darkness. Headlights, real ones, moving somewhere beyond the forest. I didn't run toward them. The idea of being seen, of having to explain why I looked the way I did, felt suddenly unsafe. Instead, I stayed low and followed the edge of the road, keeping to the shadows. The gravel bit into my feet, sharp and grounding, reminding me where I was. Farther down, a small building came into view, lit from the inside. A gas station, or something close enough to pass for one. I stopped just short of the light and wiped my hands on my jacket. The red stains smeared, but they didn't disappear. When someone finally noticed me, I only said I'd gotten lost. I didn't mention the lodge. I didn't mention the man. And I didn't mention the way the floor had guided me. Even standing under fluorescent light, I kept expecting slow, uneven footsteps to sound behind me. I thought distance would loosen its grip on me. It didn't. Back home, the lodge followed me in pieces, not images layouts. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel the floorboards under my feet. Cold, smooth, guiding. The bottle with the red liquid came back in flashes. So did the carved lines, sharp and patient. What stayed with me the most was the tack. The way he lifted it, turned it, decided it mattered. I tried telling myself it was just fear filling in gaps, that people do strange things in isolation. But every time I traced my steps in memory, they still connected, angles forming without my consent. I stopped walking barefoot in my own house. I checked the floor before every step, even in the dark. At night, I'd wait convinced I'd left something behind. Not an object evidence. And sometimes, just before sleep, I felt it again. That sense of being moved, gently, toward a shape I couldn't see. Time passed, but the night never settled into memory the way other things did. It stayed active, close enough to interfere. At first, it was small. A dropped glass shattering at my feet because I hesitated instead of stepping back. A misjudged curb, my ankle folding the same wrong way twice in 1 month. Cuts on my hands from tools I've used for years, always along the same lines. I told myself it was clumsiness, fatigue, nerves that hadn't quite gone back to normal. But the pattern didn't fade. It tightened. Whenever something went wrong, I noticed how my body had moved just before it happened. The angle I turned, the pause that didn't need to be there, the way I leaned toward danger instead of away from it, like my weight had been placed for me. I started avoiding certain situations, not because they scared me, but because they felt set. Corners where I always seemed to stop, doorways where I slowed down for no reason, stairs I took too carefully and still slipped on. The worst part wasn't when I was alone. It was when other people were nearby. A coworker stumbling because I shifted at the wrong moment. Someone brushing past me and catching their sleeve on something sharp I hadn't noticed. Near misses that left everyone laughing, except me, standing there, cold, replaying the sequence. It felt familiar. Not the accidents themselves, but the order of them. I stopped hiking. Stopped going anywhere remote. I told myself it was caution. I told others it was preference. But even at home, the feeling followed. Moving through rooms like they were narrower than they looked. Choosing paths that made no sense once I was already on them. Stepping where the floor would give way, just enough to remind me. What unsettles me now isn't that I survived that place. It's that my body still behaves like it's inside it. Sometimes I think the night ended when I ran downhill. Sometimes I wonder if that's when it actually started. Because every so often, something goes wrong around me. And just before it does, I recognize the motion.